I want to give a moment of silence for maybe the best call I've seen on Bloomberg on the economy and Bloomberg surveillance. And this was your Thomas Mayer a million years ago in this building, was so far out front on the euro challenges of the entire system and the challenges of it. Do you maintain a euro optimism at this time?
For currency level, no. For the euro's existence, yes. It's a political issue. I believe that the principal players, the Germans in this particular case, have shown a political will to keep the system intact and are prepared to make the financial sacrifices to make that work. But in terms of the euro itself, weakness is here to stay. And as you know, we have forecast that takes it down to parity.
But takes it down to parity. And part of this, Francine, is the exogenous shock of a year ago when if the facts change, we change. And that was the Swiss National Bank. Bring up the chart, Chania, if you would. Francine, explain this moment. I was not on the set. Ms. Lacroix was. You and Guy Johnson did a fabulous job of dropping your double espresso when the Swiss adjusted. Remind us.
I mean, look, it was down some 30%, I think, in a minute and a half. This is after 3 years of pegging it to euro. It dropped its franc cap of 120 euro. That was exactly a year ago. And then they've basically had this twin intervention, right, to try and control the currency, so the twin strategy of negative rates, but also currency.
So there we are, Sir Howard, with the history that Francine lived in real time. We're reliving it again. When does this end? When does the shock and awe of the markets and finance and macroeconomics end?
Well, I don't think it's going to end soon, because I think there are still some fault lines in the financial system and the world economy which have not been corrected since the crisis, the biggest one being the amount of debt. And that's been shifted around from the private sector to the public sector, but it hasn't been removed, and not much deleveraging has occurred. And whilst there is that large debt overhang, you find that what happens in financial markets gets amplified, if you like, because of the sheer volume of debt there is swishing around the system. And I think until we work some of that debt off, we'll continue to find we'll be vulnerable to this kind of volatility.
David, if we look at Swiss franc, it finished last year some 10% stronger against euro. What does it teach us on how central banks should be looking at this new world order?
Well, the Swiss franc was a particular case. Communications there were somewhat wanting, I should say.
Well, there were none.
There were none, right. But just to follow up what Howard was saying here, that there has been an important structural change, and that is the institutions that normally would step in when there was a market dislocation just do not have the wherewithal or the capital constraints, regulatory constraints to do that. I've been sitting on the bank's risk committee for the last 18 years, and I can tell you this, that in 2003, 2004, there was much more of an appetite to step in when you saw dislocations. Today, we're all aware of dislocations taking place in high yield, leverage lending, and other places like that. We no longer, because of Volcker, because of TLAC, because of other regulatory constraints, are prepared to step in to do that. Nor are we prepared to finance those hedge funds and others that would normally do that. So you're going to see these episodes of volatility that we have seen. August 24 started, and then 3 or 4 since then, throughout the year until this is done. And I think the deleveraging is a very, very important component as well.
But, and some would argue, actually, this is a much healthier place to be in.
Well, it's a case of careful what you wish for. I mean, in principle, it is a healthier place. You know, much better capitalized banks, focusing on customer needs and all of that. This is all good stuff, and I'm sure that David would not disagree with any of it. The problem is we're in a lengthy transition phase where we need different kinds of institutions to come in and play the buffer role and the sort of shock absorber role that the big banks have played in the past. And that's not yet in place, I think. So I think we're in a long transitional period, which can be quite uncomfortable.
You mentioned fault lines, which brings us to Ragarajan, the head of the Reserve Bank of India. He'll join us in Davos this year for an important conversation. What are the fault lines you're most focused on? The media and the street, to an extent, is focused on $29 Brent, migrating to 28. There's the media drama of this day and then the next day. But what is Howard Davies focused on that would be the fault line that would end with some catharsis to clear markets?
Well, I think one is clearly the adjustment in China, that we've all talked about the idea that the Chinese economy can't carry on growing at double-digit growth rates, and that if a thing can't go on forever, that one day it will end, and all of these wise things have been said. But actually adjusting to a lower level of growth.
Do they only do that through
China,
currency? Is currency the only avenue?
Well, currency is one, but also their overseas investment will be another. I think we'll see much less of that for a while. So we're adjusting to that changed role of the Chinese economy, or changed growth rate, and of course the peripheral economies around China, which will be affected in the same kind of way. So I think that's one thing that we're adjusted to. I come back to my deleveraging. I think that's something that we still are suffering, and I think a third one is this change in the financial sector, with banks having to be much more strongly capitalised and being much more constrained in the bets they can take.
Maybe